Millionaire forces humble black woman to cook, unaware she's a Michelin-starred chef. Enjoy the story. The gleaming industrial kitchen pulsed with tension as Chef Richard Langston's voice cut through the controlled chaos. His finger jabbed, accusingly, at the woman standing quietly by the vegetable prep station. Her hands paused over the perfectly julienned carrots, each slice uniform and precise. "You, yes, you," he barked, his British accent sharpening with irritation. "Step away from the carrots. You're making a mess." Evelyn Johnson looked down at her work, immaculate, methodical, perfect. But she simply nodded, wiping her hands on the plain white apron that hung loosely over her modest black dress. Her name tag read only Evelyn, nothing else. The kitchen staff averted their eyes, a collective wince rippling through them. "Make my Wellington," Langston announced loudly, turning to address the entire kitchen, but fixing his gaze on Evelyn. "Let's see what Miss Prep Cook thinks she can do. Either it's perfect or she's out." Nobody moved. The entire kitchen froze, as if the air itself had thickened with dread. Evelyn wiped her hands on her apron slowly, calmly. Her deep brown skin gleamed under the harsh kitchen lights, her short coiled hair neatly tucked into a simple wrap. Her eyes, which had witnessed both soul-crushing poverty and transcendent beauty, remained serene. "Yes, chef," she said, her voice steady and melodious. What they didn't know, what he didn't know, was that Evelyn wasn't just any cook. 4 years ago, before she vanished from the culinary world, she was Chef Evelyn Johnson. And the first blacks. Woman to earn 2 Michelin stars in France. Her restaurant in Lyon, Magnolia, had revolutionized how Europeans understood Southern American cuisine, elevated to haute status. Food critics had written poetry about her duck confit with okra foam. Renowned chefs across 3 continents had attempted to replicate her technique for sweetbread roulade with cane syrup glaze. But then she disappeared. Some blamed burnout. Others whispered of racism poisoning the upper echelons of haute cuisine. The truth was more complex. Evelyn had grown weary, not just of the relentless pressure, but of the soullessness that had infected her passion. Food had become a performance, a spectacle divorced from its true purpose. She missed feeding people, really feeding them, nourishing their bodies and souls alike. So now, at 36, she was on a quiet journey across America, working under her real first name, but dropping her well-known surname, moving through random kitchens, observing, rediscovering what food meant to her, stripped of accolades and expectations. She had deliberately chosen this Chicago restaurant owned by the infamous TV personality and millionaire chef Richard Langston, whose empire stretched from Los Angeles to Dubai. He was notorious for his ruthless perfectionism and thinly veiled contempt for those he deemed beneath him, especially those who didn't look like him. He hadn't looked twice at her resume, hadn't noticed her calloused fingers or the way she held her chef's knife with surgical precision, hadn't cared when she modestly mentioned she had some French training. Now he was trying to humiliate her. The beef Wellington was his crown jewel, a dish he claimed only he could execute to perfection, and here he was, handing it to the new black prep cook on day 2, knowing she'd fail, setting her up to be ridiculed like he'd done to others before. But Evelyn simply took the recipe card, her fingers brushing against it with the gentleness of someone touching a sacred text. She didn't need it. She wouldn't follow it. She would make her own. Her hands moved with quiet grace. She requested specific cuts of beef, rejecting the standard fillet with a subtle shake of her head. She ignored the bland mushrooms listed on the recipe, and instead asked Daniel, the sous chef, for a mix of porcini and chanterelles. "Please," she said softly. Daniel blinked, something in her tone making him obey without question. As she worked, people began to watch, their tasks slowing as their attention drifted toward her station. They noticed the way she seasoned by scent, not measurement, the way she folded the puff pastry with layers of butter like sheets of the finest silk, the way she reduced the red wine juice until it was deep and glossy like molasses on a summer day, and the way she smiled softly, almost as if she was praying over every ingredient that passed through her reverent hands. Chef Langston passed by several times, his frown deepening with each circuit of the kitchen. "You're doing it wrong," he scoffed during his third pass. That mushroom paste should be thinner, and where's the time? His voice carried, designed to humiliate. Evelyn didn't look up. Her focus remained on the pastry before her, hands never faltering. "It's not your Wellington," she murmured, just loud enough to be heard. "What did you say?" Langston's voice dropped dangerously low. Evelyn finally raised her eyes to meet his. "I said it's mine, chef. I'm not recreating a monument, I'm feeding people." Laughter bubbled awkwardly from two-line cooks before they stifled it behind their hands. Langston's jaw tensed, a muscle twitching just beneath his perfectly trimmed beard. "You better hope it's edible," he said, stalking away. When the dish was finally plated, golden, glistening, fragrant, the kitchen fell into a breathless silence. Evelyn stood back, hands clasped before her, eyes downcast once more. The head server, Marcus, approached with reverence, lifting the plate as if it contained not food, but a work of art. "Table 9, he whispered to Evelyn. "VIPs." She nodded once, the barest hint of a smile touching her lips. Marcus disappeared through the swinging doors. The kitchen held its collective breath. Among the VIPs sat Eleanor Wright, the formidable food critic for the American Gastronomy Guild, the kind whose word could make or break careers, the kind who had once described Langston's cooking as competent but soulless. Minutes stretched into eternity. Then Marcus burst through the door, his normally composed face alight with excitement. "They're asking to meet the chef who made it. They said it's the best Wellington they've ever tasted." All eyes turned to Langston, his face contorted, color draining, then flooding back in a violent rush. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. And then Evelyn stepped forward, removing her apron with a single fluid motion. "I made it," she said. The simple dignity in her voice silenced the room. Eleanor Wright appeared at the kitchen door, her tall frame commanding attention. Her eyes scanned the kitchen before landing on Evelyn. Recognition dawned on her face, followed by disbelief. "Wait, Evelyn Johnson." Her voice trembled slightly. "The Evelyn Johnson from Magnolia in Lyon?" Langston's head whipped around. "What?" I thought you had retired," Wright continued, taking a step forward. Evelyn just smiled, a gentle curve of lips. "I took a break." Langston staggered back like he'd been physically struck. You tricked me. You infiltrated my kitchen." "Under false pretenses." "No," Evelyn replied calmly. "I applied for a position. You never asked who I was." "How you had no right," he sputtered, indignation rising like a tide. "I had every right," she said, her voice remaining tranquil but gaining steel. "I've earned everything you think you own, and I've done it without belittling others, without screaming, without fear." The staff remained frozen, watching this unexpected confrontation unfold like a slow-motion car crash. Daniel stepped forward, clearing his throat. "Chef Langston," he said cautiously, "I think you should thank her. We all should." Something cracked in Langston's expression. Years of arrogance began to melt away like winter ice in spring's first warm day. He looked around the kitchen and, for the first time, truly saw the fear in his staff's eyes. Saw himself, through their lenses, saw what he had become. He faltered, his legendary confidence evaporating. Then, turning to Evelyn with visible effort, Would you teach me your mushroom blend?" Evelyn smiled with genuine warmth. "Only if you promise to let someone else speak once in a while." That night, the kitchen changed. The staff moved with joy, not dread. Langston asked questions instead of barking orders. He watched Evelyn's techniques with the humility of a first-year culinary student. He listened when she spoke of balance, of respect for ingredients, of cooking as an act of love rather than conquest. Evelyn stayed 3 more days, guiding, teaching, laughing. She showed the pastry chef how to infuse warmth into his technically perfect but emotionally sterile desserts. She taught the line cooks how to season with confidence rather than fear. She sat with Langston after hours, speaking candidly about how greatness comes not from domination, but from elevation, of ingredients, of techniques, of people. On her final evening, as service wound down, Eleanor Wright returned. She sat at the chef's table, notebook conspicuously present. "Will you come back?" she asked Evelyn directly. "The culinary world has missed you." Evelyn considered the question, wiping her hands on a towel. "Not yet," she said finally. "I haven't found what I'm looking for." "And what is that exactly?" Evelyn gazed around the kitchen at the staff now moving with confidence and joy. At Langston, demonstrating a technique to a young commis with patience instead of frustration. "My purpose," she said simply. "I lost it somewhere between the second Michelin star and the fourth magazine cover." Wright nodded thoughtfully. "And when you find it? Then I'll build something new, something that feeds souls, not just bodies or egos." The next morning Evelyn left. Another town awaited, another hidden kitchen, another forgotten chef to inspire. But her legacy remained. On the specials, board next to Beef Wellington à la Johnson, were written the words she lived by. "Feed them with skill, but always, always, feed them with love." Have you ever known someone who remained dignified despite being underestimated? Share your thoughts in the comments. The kitchen at Langston's continued its transformation in the weeks following Evelyn's departure. Richard, once feared for his volcanic temper, now paused before reacting. He tasted dishes with closed eyes, seeking not just perfection, but heart. The staff noticed. Customers noticed. Eleanor Wright noticed, penning a review that described the restaurant's new direction as a revelation, as if the entire establishment has remembered why we cook in the first place. 1 month after Evelyn's quiet revolution, Daniel received a package. Inside was a handwritten recipe for her grandmother's peach cobbler, not the deconstructed version that had wowed Paris, but the original, 3 generations old. The note read simply, "Share this. It was never meant to be a secret." That evening, during family meal, the staff ate together in appreciative silence. The cobbler, humble yet transcendent, reminded them all why they had fallen in love with food in the first place. "I've been thinking," Langston said after the last spoonful had been savored, "about opening a cooking school. Not for professionals, for kids from neighborhoods that never see people like them in kitchens like ours." The staff exchanged glances, of surprise and approval. "Chef Johnson would approve," Daniel said with a smile. "I hope so," Langston replied, "because I'd like to ask her to help run it." 6 months later, in a converted warehouse on Chicago's South Side, the first class of 12-year-olds filed into the Sinclair Langston Culinary Academy. Their eyes widened at the gleaming professional-grade kitchens, the wall of herbs growing under special lights, the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a community garden, and at the front of the classroom stood Evelyn Johnson, her hair now styled in a crown of natural curls, wearing a crisp white chef's coat with her full name. Embroidered in gold, Executive Chef Evelyn Johnson. Beside her stood Richard Langston, his posture more relaxed, his eyes softer than they had been in decades. "Welcome," Evelyn said to the children, her voice warm as freshly baked bread. "Today, we learn to feed people." That evening, as the last student left, bubbling with excitement about the pasta they had made from scratch, Evelyn stood at the window, watching the sunset paint the Chicago skyline in hues of amber and rose. "I found it," she said softly. "Found what?" Langston asked, pausing in his meticulous cleanup. "My purpose," she replied. "It was never about stars or accolades. It was about legacy, about passing on not just techniques, but values." Langston nodded, understanding dawning in his eyes. "You know, I never properly apologized for how I treated you that first day." Evelyn turned to him, her expression serene. "Actions speak louder than words, Richard, and your actions these past months have said plenty." "Still," he insisted, "I'm sorry and thank you for not giving up on me." Evelyn smiled. "That's what good teachers do. They see potential even when it's buried under layers of, let's call it reduction gone too far." They both laughed, the sound echoing in the empty kitchen, no longer a battlefield, but a sanctuary. 1 year later, the Sinclair Langston Culinary Academy welcomed its second class, and its third. Children who had never seen professional kitchens now moved with confidence among burners and blenders. Graduates began filling positions in restaurants across the city, bringing with them not just skills, but Evelyn's philosophy, that food prepared with respect and love nourishes more than the body. On the Academy's second anniversary, Eleanor Wright returned once more. She watched a class, interviewed students, and broke bread at the communal table where staff and students ate together daily. "You've created something remarkable here," she told Evelyn as they walked through the now expanded community garden. "Something more lasting than any restaurant." Evelyn nodded, kneeling to check a row of heirloom tomatoes planted by the youngest. "Class, this is my third Michelin star," she said, rubbing the rich soil between her fingers, "the one that matters most." That evening, after everyone had gone, Evelyn stood in the quiet kitchen. She ran her hand along the countertops where young hands had rolled pasta, chopped vegetables, and learned to create rather than destroy, where they had learned that food was love made visible. She thought of her journey, from the hungry child in Georgia who watched her grandmother coax miracles from humble ingredients, to the celebrated chef in France who had lost her way amid the glamour to this place of perfect clarity and purpose. In the stillness she whispered her grandmother's words, the mantra that had guided her home. Feed them with skill, but always, always, feed them with love. You are amazing. If you genuinely enjoyed this story, please leave a like and subscribe. It's a great feedback for me. If it made you feel seen, heard, or simply reminded you that change is still possible, share it with someone who needs a little hope today. See you.